With the change of government, there's a lot of positive vibe. There are a lot of multi-national companies that are looking at investing into India, and that's really good news for us. But that also brings up challenges because there are issues with regard to skill availability with the kind of opportunities that we foresee in the future. And that's where we probably need to really put our heads together and see, how we could, as HR professionals, if I would just take this step in the context of this conversation, could actually contribute to that front. How could we, as a nation, be ready to fulfill that demand as we foresee it as it coming? So hence, I do see that as an opportunity and also as a concern that we would have to address in the going future. So I think the sector that definitely has the word in the street is definitely is going to be infrastructure. And I do also see a lot of investment happening in the BFSI sector also. And this will also have a related impact with the ancillary sectors such as IT and the other sectors which are going to be direct or indirect beneficiaries from this change. So definitely there is a larger expansion happening. So one thing leading to another is definitely going to happen, and that's something which we have to be prepared for. We are in for a very big time, and in my submission, by 2025, India is going to be at least the top 3 countries in the world. That's going to drive the global economy. And we are already seeing that change now, because if you look at the BRICS countries, consolidation of economy and growth and contribution towards GDP, India has one of the highest contribution. In fact, the whole world is now looking at India in terms of its contribution and where it can actually make its money. So we are in for big times. One thing which we also need to realize is that there's going to be a major change in the way work is going to be undertaken in the future. Careers in the future are not going to be the way that we have known it and going to have seen it thus far. The way I see it is that in the future, there are going to be at least 5 major career disruptions that are going to happen. No individual at any point in time is going to end up retiring doing the same work. He would undergo, or he will actually take up a major challenge in his life at least 5 times, and is going to take major changes with regard to what he or she is going to do. So you would probably start off as an engineer, end up as a musician. And that's where the world is going for. And I think that's where we need to probably keep ourselves really ready and adaptive as to if that's going to be the change, then what's going to be our tactics in terms of keeping ourselves open as an employer and as probably enablers of skill building in the organization. So I think technology is enabling growth of learning, because today what was considered to be scarce in the past by the virtue of non-availability of resources is now just available on the tap of a fingertip of when you go onto the internet. So with that said, I think it's going to be imperative that, given that knowledge is going to be granted, scaling up is not going to be a challenge for the new generation. The challenge will remain for us as HR professionals as to how ready are we to adopt and to manage these new changes. In my submission, predictive analytics is the next big thing. What we have done so far has given us the success that we have achieved so far, but that's not going to assure us future of what we're going to see in the next few years. That's definitely going to call for a very different mindset, a very different skill ability of HR professionals, being comfortable with data, with statistics, the ability to look through the ambiguous data and plethora of data that will come your way. It's going to be a critical skill that an HR professional is going to need to survive. And I also do see a major change happening in the way HR has been handled up until now. Today, up until now, you would always have students from the social sciences background moving into HR. I'm seeing a major change today. We have a lot of technologists who are moving into HR and vice versa. So you should also have the realization that in the future there will be an expectation that HR will be expected to move into the business and take up that responsibility. So I think there are a good number of examples in the industry today. Dr. Santrup Mishra is a standing example of how an HR professional can move into the business in a very seamless fashion and actually set an example for many of us at this point in time. So I definitely see that major change happening for each one of us. I think that question would have been answered a million times up until now, and I'm sure there's a lot of data on the net that can qualify that could give you a better answer on that. But my view is definitely a lot of change in values. These two population or these two generations have been born in very different times. A time, Gen X, largely grown up in a time of scarcity, largely at a time when the nation was going through a lot of changes, has probably seen the liberalization era of this country. Gen Y relatively grown up or brought up or born into a environment of plenty, and hence the struggle of self-security was never a concern as opposed to what the Gen X had to basically encounter. And so very different times that these two entities or these two generations have grown up in, and that's definitely a reflection of how they carry themselves out. And that's where it goes back to what I said earlier on, that it's with regard to the new generation, the Gen Y and the Gen Zs as I call them, is where by the virtue of growing up in a very secured environment, in an environment where things are available by granted in terms of information, in terms of a better economic status, people will venture out to do something really radical with their lives. They will no longer take up a view with regard to I'm going to retire in a given area of work. You will definitely see a lot of disruptions in terms of how careers are going to be maneuvered in the future. That's going to be the major game changer for us, and we have to be ready for that.
Talking of
I definitely see that impact happening across, because it's more with regard to adapting to the workforce that you're trying to target. And coming back to the point, the target is definitely the Gen Ys and the Gen Z generations that are going to follow, and they are the most technologically savvy generation that we have come across so far. And so with that said, it's more come up as a necessity than as an invention by any other reason. And I hence do believe that today recruiters and HR organizations and even CEOs are realizing that it's very, very important for them to wake up to the new technology trends and look at how they could leverage social in a very strong way to connect to the prospective employees. And that's actually a survival game, as I would call it, rather than as a fashion to just toe your line on. I think there's definitely a necessity of the day. At this point in time, if you look at it, this whole generation wave with regard to becoming social savvy has only begun in the last few quarters, if I were to actually look at the trend of how much of intensity of focus has actually been, has been invested by organizations. So that is definitely going to be a challenge, but my confidence remains that we will overcome that, because our current practical experiences on the ground is that there are definitely issues concerning what people tend to project themselves on, on a media vis-a-vis what we get to realize them, and there are definitely deviations in the system. But I do believe that there will always be minor aberrations with regard to the larger good, but that should not really diffuse our enthusiasm in doing what we should do, and that is to keep the good work going. And I'm sure that's going to be an area that's going to require some level of thinking as to how do we really ensure authenticity of data that we see on such mediums. So there are two parts to the answer. One part is definitely by design of the generation that we're dealing with, are social savvy. So we don't have to really invest anything on that. That's happening by design. As for organization readiness, as I said a few moments ago, we are still in the process of adapting ourselves, and I don't think we have really achieved the maturity zone that we should. I think the realization has set in, and that's the good news. The challenge that remains is how fast we adopt and how fast are we able to move into the zone and connect with this generation, because we still have a lot of entrepreneur-run organizations where the acceptance of change is relatively slower. But I'm sure that this definitely does not exist in larger organizations, which are basically the breeding hubs for the Gen Ys and the Gen Zs, as I would call them. But then again, as I've said, the intensity has only started a few quarters ago. We are on the zone, and the good news is that we're going to be there very soon. When you say mobile, you're talking about mobile applications or mobile related applications, everything. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's, if you look at it, I would say definitely that's going to be a very critical tool, in the process, because definitely that's where the generation shift is moving on. I mean, I know people are slowly and definitely in a very fast way moving away from PCs and laptops, and that's definitely a generation of the X and the generations of the past. The new generation definitely is much more mobile, much more savvy, much more technology enabled, and hence being adaptive with regard to the newer technologies concerning mobile and mobile related technologies is going to be a game changer for many an organization. And I think your thought is very right. I think an organization has to be very well aware of not only of the changing values, but also be aware of what are the tools and processes that the new generation adopts and are more comfortable with.